During the 1950s and 1960s, the automotive world saw a mix of luxury cars and more affordable models. While some cars from this era became symbols of elegance and power, others were built to serve a much more budget-conscious audience. These cars were often poorly made, unreliable, and generally undesirable. Here are 13 of the crappiest cars from the 1950s and 1960s that were often the only options for those with limited finances. The Renault Doofen, produced from 1956 to 1967, was envisioned as an affordable, mass-market car that could bring modern motoring to a broad audience. While the Doofen sold in large numbers and became quite popular in post-war Europe, its reputation eventually became marred by its significant flaws. It's now remembered as one of the more notorious automotive missteps of the era due to its weak performance, poor build quality, and reliability issues. One of the most glaring weaknesses of the Renault Doofen was its underpowered engine. The car was equipped with a mere 32 horsepower, 845 cubic centimeter, four-cylinder engine, which was adequate for city driving but left much to be desired on highways or any situation requiring acceleration. The Doofen was painfully slow, with a top speed barely crossing 60 miles per hour, making it a frustrating experience for drivers used to more powerful vehicles. This lack of power was one of the key factors that led to the car's poor reception outside of Europe, especially in the United States, where bigger and faster cars dominated the market. Aside from its lackluster performance, the Renault Doofen was also notorious for its mechanical problems. It was prone to breakdowns, often leaving owners stranded. Its design and engineering, while innovative in some respects, were not robust enough to withstand regular use, especially in more demanding driving environments. The car's rear engine, rear-wheel drive layout, borrowed from the successful Renault 4CV, led to tricky handling, especially in wet or slippery conditions. This further diminished confidence in the car's safety and durability. One of the major long-term issues that plagued the Doofen was its susceptibility to rust. The car's body was not well protected from corrosion, particularly in regions with wet or salty roads, which caused it to deteriorate quickly. The rust problem became so severe that many Doofens were left in poor condition within just a few years of ownership, making them expensive to maintain and repair. In fact, this issue became emblematic of the car's broader problems with quality control and build durability. The interior of the Renault Doofen, while functional and relatively comfortable for a budget car, was also very basic. There were few amenities, and the materials used were not of high quality. As time went on, wear and tear quickly became evident, with many Doofens developing rattles and squeaks in their interiors. For a car that was meant to offer an affordable and practical motoring solution, this lack of refinement and durability only added to its negative reputation. Despite these issues, the Renault Doofen did have a few redeeming qualities that endeared it to a certain group of drivers. Its small size and nimble handling made it well-suited for navigating narrow European city streets, and it was relatively easy to park. Its affordable price also made it accessible to many who otherwise would not have been able to own a car. However, these benefits were far outweighed by the problems that plagued the vehicle over time. In the United States, Renault aggressively marketed the Doofen, presenting it as an economical alternative to the larger, more powerful cars typically favored by American consumers. Initial sales were strong, but as word of its mechanical unreliability and weak performance spread, the car quickly gained a negative reputation. The Doofen's inability to meet the needs of American drivers, combined with the high expectations set by its marketing, ultimately led to a steep decline in sales. Today, the Renault Doofen is often seen as a cautionary tale in automotive history. It serves as a reminder that affordability and mass production do not always equate to quality or longevity. While the car was revolutionary in some ways, particularly for its time and place in post-war Europe, its many shortcomings ensured that it would be remembered more for its flaws than for its innovations. For collectors and vintage car enthusiasts, the Doofen holds a certain nostalgic charm, representing a bygone era of budget motoring. However, its reputation for poor reliability and rust problems continues to overshadow any affection that might be felt for its quaint design and historical significance. Today, it stands as a symbol of both the promise and peril of mass-produced cars aimed at the broadest possible audience, illustrating how ambition and execution sometimes miss the mark in automotive design. The Ford Prefect, produced from 1938 to 1961, was designed to be an affordable and practical vehicle for the masses, especially in the post-war era when basic transportation needs were paramount. Initially, it found success due to its simplicity, reliability, and affordability. However, as the years passed, its utilitarian design, lack of comfort, and minimal features became increasingly outdated, especially by the 1950s, when consumer expectations for cars had shifted dramatically. The Prefect's exterior design, while functional, was never particularly stylish, and by the time the 1950s rolled around, it was seen as old-fashioned and lacking the flair of more modern cars. It retained a boxy, upright shape with flat panels, which reflected its no-nonsense approach to car design. In comparison to the more streamlined and sleek cars that were being produced during this period, particularly from American and European manufacturers, the Prefect appeared stiff and out of touch with contemporary trends. It simply wasn't designed to impress visually, but rather to serve as a dependable workhorse for everyday transportation. One of the most significant criticisms of the Ford Prefect was its interior, which was cramped and offered little in terms of comfort or amenities. The cabin was Spartan, with basic materials and limited space for passengers. This lack of refinement became more glaring as automotive interiors in the 1950s started to emphasize comfort, style, and convenience. Competitors were adding features like more comfortable seating, better soundproofing, and a range of amenities that were entirely absent in the Prefect. The car's interior was utilitarian to the core, with few concessions to passenger comfort, which made longer journeys in the vehicle an uncomfortable experience. Under the hood, the Prefect was powered by a modest engine that was designed more for fuel economy than for performance. Early models were equipped with a 1.2-liter inline-4 engine, which provided just enough power for basic transportation. Later models saw some incremental improvements in engine size and performance, but even then, the car's acceleration and top speed were unimpressive. The Prefect was a slow and steady car, built more for plodding along urban streets than for any sort of spirited driving. Its handling was basic, offering little in the way of driving pleasure or excitement. The Prefect's simplicity was both its strength and its weakness. On one hand, it was easy to maintain, with straightforward mechanical components that could be repaired or replaced at low cost. This made it an appealing choice for drivers who wanted an affordable car with low running costs. On the other hand, the lack of innovation or advanced features meant that it quickly fell behind other vehicles that were more exciting to drive, more comfortable to ride in, and more visually appealing. By the 1950s, the market was evolving rapidly, and consumers were looking for more than just basic transportation. They wanted style, comfort, and a little bit of luxury, even in affordable cars. As other manufacturers started to embrace new technologies and design philosophies, the Prefect remained stubbornly utilitarian. This stagnation in innovation was one of the reasons it began to feel increasingly outdated, especially as the post-war economic boom allowed more consumers to consider cars that offered more than just the basics. For many, the Prefect represented a bygone era of pre-war simplicity, but by the 1950s and 60s, this minimalist approach was no longer enough to satisfy the demands of car buyers. Despite these shortcomings, the Ford Prefect did retain a certain charm for those who appreciated its straightforward, no-frills approach to motoring. It was dependable, easy to work on, and inexpensive to run, qualities that were still important to many drivers, particularly those who were not concerned with the flashier aspects of car ownership. For a certain demographic, the Prefect was the epitome of practicality, and its long production run is a testament to its ability to meet the basic needs of a large number of people. However, as the automotive industry continued to progress, the Ford Prefect became increasingly obsolete. By the time production ended in 1961, it was clear that the Prefect's time had passed. It was no longer competitive in a market that was moving toward more modern, comfortable, and feature-rich cars. For many, the Prefect became a symbol of an earlier era of motoring, one that was simpler and less concerned with style or luxury, but also one that had become increasingly out of step with the desires of post-war consumers. In retrospect, the Ford Prefect holds a certain nostalgic value for those who experienced its straightforward reliability firsthand. It was a workhorse vehicle that got the job done, but it never aspired to be more than that. Today, it is remembered as a practical but uninspiring car. The Trabant 601, produced from 1963 to 1990, became an infamous symbol of the Eastern Bloc's automotive shortcomings during the Cold War. Manufactured by VEB Sachsenring in East Germany, the Trabant, commonly referred to as the Trabi, was a small, compact car that was built to be affordable and accessible to the masses. However, its numerous limitations and lack of modernization over the years earned it a reputation as one of the most undesirable vehicles in history. One of the most notable and unusual aspects of the Trabant 601 was its body, which was made from Duraplast, a plastic-like material composed of recycled cotton waste and phenolic resin. Duraplast was chosen due to the scarcity of steel in East Germany at the time, and while it was lightweight and relatively durable, it gave the Trabant a flimsy, toy-like feel. The car's lightweight construction didn't translate into speed or efficiency either, as its underpowered engine struggled to keep up with even the modest demands of everyday driving. The Trabant 601 was powered by a primitive two-stroke engine, which was known for being noisy, polluting, and extremely inefficient. The two-cylinder 600cc engine produced a mere 26 horsepower, which was enough to push the car along at a top speed of about 100 kilometers per hour, 62 miles per hour, but not without a struggle. It took nearly 20 seconds to reach 60 kilometers per hour, 37 miles per hour, making acceleration an excruciatingly slow process. The engine's design required the driver to mix oil with gasoline to lubricate the engine, which not only produced an excessive amount of smoke, but also contributed to the car's terrible fuel efficiency. The distinct blue smoke that billowed from the exhaust became a signature sight and smell for anyone who encountered a Trabant on the road. In terms of handling and driving experience, the Trabant 601 was far from enjoyable. Its suspension was rudimentary, and the ride was harsh, especially on rough roads. The steering was vague and imprecise, and the car's tiny, narrow wheels didn't inspire confidence when cornering or driving at higher speeds. The brakes were also notoriously unreliable, requiring significant effort to stop the car. Overall, driving a Trabant was an experience fraught with discomfort and frustration, compounded by the car's unpredictable reliability. Despite its many shortcomings, the Trabant was one of the few cars available to the average citizen in East Germany and other parts of the Eastern Bloc. Waiting lists to purchase a Trabant could stretch for years, sometimes as long as 10 to 15 years, as production capacity couldn't keep up with demand. For many, simply owning a car, any car, was a sign of relative privilege, even if the Trabant was far from ideal. Once you finally received your Trabant after years of waiting, the sense of accomplishment quickly gave way to the harsh reality of owning a vehicle that was outdated, uncomfortable, and prone to frequent breakdowns. While the Trabant 601 remained virtually unchanged throughout its production run, the world around it advanced rapidly. By the 1980s, when the rest of Europe and the West were enjoying modern, efficient cars with improved safety features and performance, the Trabant had become a relic of a bygone era. The lack of investment in innovation and modernization was emblematic of the struggles of the Eastern Bloc's planned economies, where resources were often allocated to meet political objectives rather than consumer needs. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the subsequent reunification of Germany marked the end of the Trabant's era. Almost overnight, the Trabant became obsolete as Western cars flooded into the East, offering superior performance, comfort, and technology. Thousands of Trabants were abandoned, left to rust in fields, or sold off cheaply. The Trabi, once a symbol of perseverance for East Germans, became a symbol of the failures of the communist regime and the stark differences between life in the East and the West. Today, the Trabant 601 holds a certain nostalgic charm for some, particularly for those who grew up with the car during the Cold War. It has become a quirky piece of automotive history, and a small community of enthusiasts still maintain and drive Trabants as a way of preserving this unique chapter in automotive culture. Despite its many faults, the Trabant remains an enduring symbol of resilience, a reminder of life behind the Iron Curtain, and an icon of an era defined by scarcity and ingenuity in the face of limitations. The Citroen 2CV, produced from 1948 to 1990, is a car that has achieved legendary status for its sheer simplicity, although it was often considered one of the most basic, bare-bones vehicles ever produced. While beloved by enthusiasts for its quirky charm and ruggedness, the 2CV was, at its core, designed as a utilitarian vehicle for rural farmers. In many ways, it felt more like a minimalist farm tool on wheels than a car built for the road. The origins of the Citroen 2CV can be traced back to pre-World War II France, when Citroen's chief designer, Pierre-Jules Boulanger, envisioned a car that could carry 4 people and 50 kilograms of goods at a maximum speed of 60 kilometers per hour. This humble objective guided the creation of the car, which was meant to provide affordable transportation for France's rural population. The 2CV was designed to be practical and durable, able to drive across bumpy, unpaved roads while keeping its passengers relatively comfortable. However, the car's extreme simplicity was both its greatest strength and its biggest drawback. The 2CV's early models were powered by a minuscule air-cooled, 375 cubic centimeter, 2-cylinder engine that produced just 9 horsepower. This tiny engine made the car incredibly slow, with a top speed of around 65 to 70 kilometers per hour, 40 to 45 miles per hour at best. Later models saw some improvements in engine power, but even then, it struggled to reach highway speeds. Acceleration was almost non-existent, and it could take over half a minute to reach 50 kilometers per hour, 31 miles per hour. For many drivers, the 2CV felt more like a lawnmower than a car when it came to performance. The 2CV's body was intentionally designed to be as light and simple as possible, contributing to its quirky, flimsy appearance. The car's distinctive corrugated steel panels gave it a unique, almost toy-like look, but they also lacked any real protection in case of an accident. The thin bodywork meant the car had very little in the way of crash safety, and its featherweight construction could leave passengers feeling vulnerable. The suspension system, however, was ahead of its time. Citroen engineered the 2CV to have an incredibly soft suspension that allowed it to glide over rough terrain, ideal for navigating rural dirt roads and fields. Yet on paved roads, the 2CV's soft suspension led to excessive body roll, making the car feel wobbly and unsteady around corners. Inside, the 2CV was as minimalist as it gets. Early models lacked most of the comforts modern drivers expect. There was no heater, the seats were little more than simple cushions stretched over metal frames, and there were very few controls on the dashboard. The windshield wipers were often powered by the car's speedometer, meaning they only worked when the car was moving fast enough. Even as later models added some conveniences, the 2CV retained its no-frills reputation. It was designed to be easy to maintain, with simple mechanical components that could be repaired with basic tools, making it a favorite among those in rural areas who needed reliability more than luxury. For some, the 2CV's simplicity was part of its charm. The car was incredibly versatile and inexpensive to operate, and its rugged nature meant it could go almost anywhere, even where larger, more powerful cars couldn't. Farmers appreciated its practicality, as the 2CV could haul goods, livestock, or produce across fields and rural roads, much like a motorized donkey. Its design ethos was rooted in practicality over aesthetics or speed, and for many owners, that was exactly what they needed. Yet for others, especially those accustomed to more advanced cars, the 2CV was seen as a last resort for those who couldn't afford anything else. The car's slow speeds, lack of power, and Spartan features made it feel hopelessly outdated, even by the 1950s and 60s. In an era when automotive technology was advancing rapidly, with cars becoming faster, safer, and more comfortable, the 2CV remained steadfast in its simplicity. It became a symbol of frugality and utilitarianism, ideal for those with little money or those who embraced a no-nonsense approach to motoring. Despite its shortcomings, the 2CV earned a place in automotive history thanks to its enduring charm, practicality, and undeniable quirkiness. Over its 42-year production run, Citroen built over 5 million 2CVs, a testament to its success as a functional, affordable vehicle for the masses. Even though it was mocked for its odd appearance, weak engine, and lack of comfort, the 2CV's place in car culture is undeniable. For many, it's a reminder of simpler times, a relic from an era when cars were built to meet the most basic needs of everyday life. Today, the Citroen 2CV has achieved iconic status, particularly among car collectors and fans of quirky, vintage vehicles. While it was never a car built for speed, style, or luxury, the 2CV's utilitarian design, durability, and playful character have made it a beloved classic. The Morris Minor, produced from 1948 to 1972, is remembered as one of the most iconic British cars, but not necessarily for its power or style. It was designed to be an affordable, practical vehicle for post-war Britain, offering basic transportation at a time when many people couldn't afford luxury. However, while the Morris Minor was successful in its mission to be accessible, it also became synonymous with being a no-frills, utilitarian workhorse that lacked excitement or modern appeal. The car was the brainchild of Sir Alec Isagonis, who would later go on to design the famous Mini. Isagonis intended the Morris Minor to be a people's car, a simple, efficient, and reliable mode of transportation. And while he succeeded in creating a car that was cheap to produce and operate, its simplicity came at the cost of power and modern features. Under the hood, the Morris Minor was powered by a modest engine. Early models came with a 918 cubic centimeter side valve engine, producing just 27.5 horsepower, which was barely enough to get the car up to highway speeds. Later versions, like the Minor 1000, received slight upgrades, but even then, the performance was far from impressive. The car's top speed was a little over 60 miles per hour, 100 kilometers per hour, and acceleration was slow. For many drivers, the Morris Minor felt underpowered, especially as automotive technology advanced throughout the 1950s and 1960s, leaving the car feeling outdated in comparison to newer models. The car's design was utilitarian in every sense. The exterior had a boxy, almost bulbous appearance, with wide, rounded fenders and a flat, unadorned grille. It was functional, but not exactly stylish, and while it may have been practical, it lacked the flair of other cars of the era. Its design language was rooted in pre-war aesthetics, making it look dated as early as the 1950s. The Morris Minor's small, compact body also meant that interior space was limited, especially for passengers in the back. The seats were basic and offered little comfort, with upholstery that reflected the car's budget-conscious origins. Inside, the car was equally minimal. The dashboard was plain, with only essential gauges and controls, and there was little in the way of luxury or advanced features. The interior materials were Spartan, with simple vinyl upholstery and hard surfaces. There was no luxury trim or optional extras. Everything about the Morris Minor was designed to be functional and cost-effective. While this no-nonsense approach made it affordable for a wide range of buyers, it also meant that the car lacked any real sense of refinement or modernity. One of the car's redeeming features, however, was its reliability. The Morris Minor was known for being incredibly durable and easy to maintain. Its simple mechanical design meant that repairs could often be done by the owner with basic tools, and spare parts were inexpensive and widely available. This helped the Morris Minor earn a reputation as a dependable workhorse, especially in rural areas where reliability was more important than style or speed. It was a car that you could count on to get from point A to point B without much fuss. However, despite its reliability, the Morris Minor wasn't a car that most people took pride in owning. It was practical, affordable, and dependable, but it wasn't aspirational. In an era when cars were increasingly becoming symbols of status and style, the Morris Minor remained a functional, bare-bones vehicle that lacked the excitement and innovation of its competitors. It was a car you bought because you needed one, not because you wanted one. It filled the role of a basic tool for transportation, but for many, it was far from a source of pride or excitement. Even though the Morris Minor was widely popular and sold in large numbers, over 1.6 million units, it was often seen as a stepping stone to something better. Drivers often traded up to more modern, powerful cars as soon as they could afford to. The car's lack of power, dated design, and minimal comfort ensured that it was viewed as a starter car rather than something to cherish. Despite these criticisms, the Morris Minor has earned a nostalgic place in automotive history. It may not have been fast or luxurious, but it played a crucial role in providing affordable transportation to post-war Britain and beyond. Its enduring legacy lies in its simplicity, reliability, and role as a practical vehicle for the everyday driver. Today, it is often remembered with fondness by those who grew up with it, even if it was never the most thrilling car to drive. The Morris Minor, with its utilitarian design and modest performance, was the quintessential no-frills car of its time. It may not have been exciting or stylish, but it was dependable, affordable, and filled a critical need during a period when many people couldn't afford anything more. The Hillman Minks, produced from 1931 to 1970, was an affordable British car aimed at the everyday driver. Over the course of its long production run, it underwent numerous changes, but the car's overall reputation remained consistent: practical, dependable, but also slow and thoroughly uninspiring. Designed to meet the needs of the middle class during an era of economic challenges, the Minks offered basic transportation at a price that was within reach for many families. However, in the process, it sacrificed much of what made cars exciting, leaving it with a legacy of being functional, yet far from fun. The Hillman Minks was a product of the Roots Group, which sought to offer the British public a reliable and affordable vehicle. Throughout the 1930s, the Minks became a popular sight on British roads, largely because it was an inexpensive, no-frills car that was easy to maintain. Mechanically, it was relatively simple, which made it durable and cost-effective to run. It was one of those cars that would just work without too much trouble, which appealed to buyers looking for basic transportation in a post-war world. But while it earned a reputation for dependability, it was hardly known for performance or excitement. One of the Minks' defining characteristics was its incredibly modest power. Early models came with engines that were underwhelming, to say the least. The original pre-war versions had four-cylinder, side-valve engines that produced minimal horsepower, giving the car an almost lethargic performance. Even as the years progressed and the engines were updated to overhead valve designs, the Hillman Minks never became a car known for speed or driving pleasure. Acceleration was sluggish, and its top speed was hardly impressive. By the standards of the time, it was painfully slow, which made driving it a less than thrilling experience. In terms of design, the Minks was utilitarian and somewhat conservative. The exterior was boxy and plain, especially in the later post-war versions, with few styling elements that stood out. Early models had a pre-war aesthetic, with rounded fenders and a simple grille. But as the years went by, the design became increasingly dated. By the 1950s and 1960s, when sleeker, more stylish cars were becoming popular, the Minks' blocky, uninspired appearance stood in stark contrast. The car's high roofline, narrow body, and overall lack of visual flair made it seem old-fashioned and bland, especially as automotive design evolved rapidly during the post-war era. Inside, the Hillman Minks was basic, offering little in the way of luxury or comfort. The interiors were Spartan, with simple materials and minimal features. There was little in the way of advanced technology or comfort, just the essentials needed for driving. While this simplicity helped keep costs down, it also made the car feel bare bones, especially compared to more well-appointed competitors. The cramped seating and lack of modern amenities didn't do much to elevate the experience, making it clear that the Minks was designed purely for practicality rather than pleasure. Despite its shortcomings in speed and style, the Hillman Minks was fairly reliable. It was a car that could get you where you needed to go without much drama, and its mechanical simplicity meant that it was relatively easy to maintain. Many families who bought a Minks held onto it for years because it was cheap to run and didn't require constant repairs. However, that reliability couldn't mask the fact that driving a Minks was often seen as a chore rather than a pleasure. The car lacked the dynamic handling, acceleration, and comfort that many drivers began to expect as the automotive industry progressed into the mid-20th century. By the 1960s, the Hillman Minks was beginning to feel increasingly out of place on the roads. While competitors were producing cars with sleeker designs, more powerful engines, and improved features, the Minks remained stuck in an earlier era. It was dependable, yes, but also uninspiring in every sense. For many drivers, the Hillman Minks represented a car you settled for rather than aspired to own. Its lack of style and underwhelming driving experience made it the sort of vehicle you purchased because it fit your budget, not because it sparked any kind of passion. The Minks' long production run finally came to an end in 1970, having left behind a mixed legacy. It was, by all accounts, a workhorse of a car that met the basic needs of many British families for nearly 4 decades. However, it was also a car that failed to evolve in any meaningful way, stuck in a world of basic engineering and utilitarian design long after other manufacturers had moved forward. It served its purpose, but it never stood out as a car that anyone was particularly proud to drive. Ultimately, the Hillman Minks is remembered not for its performance, style, or innovation, but for its sheer practicality.
The Gago Mobile 250/300, produced from 1951 to 1969, was the embodiment of practicality and affordability in the post-war era, designed for those who needed basic transportation without the frills. Manufactured by Hansglas GmbH in Germany, the Gago Mobile was part of the microcar trend that emerged during the 1950s and 1960s, catering to drivers with limited budgets and modest needs. These cars were intended to be simple, cost-effective solutions to mobility, but they came with significant compromises in terms of performance, safety, and comfort. The Gago Mobile 250/300, while charming in its own quirky way, was a car that left much to be desired when it came to modern driving standards. At first glance, the Gago Mobile looked almost toy-like due to its small dimensions. The car was remarkably tiny, fitting into the microcar category with ease. It was often referred to as a bubble car, a popular nickname for the many diminutive cars of the time. The Gago Mobile had a compact, rounded body that featured 2 doors, a short wheelbase, and small wheels that barely gave it enough ground clearance to navigate uneven roads. Its tiny stature made it an ideal vehicle for narrow city streets, but it also gave the car an air of fragility. There was no mistaking the fact that this was a car built for short trips, small spaces, and light driving. Under the hood, the Gago Mobile came with a 2-cylinder air-cooled engine that was either 250 cubic centimeters or 300 cubic centimeters, depending on the model. The engine was woefully underpowered, producing around 13 to 15 horsepower, depending on the version. With such a small engine, the car struggled to keep up with modern traffic, particularly on highways or faster roads. Its top speed hovered around 55 miles per hour, and even reaching that modest speed was a challenge. Acceleration was slow, and the car often felt under strain when trying to manage anything other than the gentlest of inclines. The 2-stroke engine was noisy, and drivers had to get used to its distinct sound, which was far from refined. One of the most glaring issues with the Gago Mobile was its lack of safety. The car was so small and light that it provided little in the way of protection in the event of an accident. The thin body panels and limited structural integrity meant that even minor collisions could have serious consequences for the occupants. The tiny wheels and narrow stance gave it poor handling, especially at higher speeds, and the car was not designed for aggressive cornering or fast maneuvers. In terms of safety features, the Gago Mobile was practically bare bones. There were no seatbelts, airbags, or crumple zones, as these safety innovations were still in their infancy at the time. Drivers and passengers were essentially sitting in a box with minimal protection, making the Gago Mobile a dangerous choice for anything other than slow urban driving. Comfort was another area where the Gago Mobile fell short. Due to its compact size, the interior was cramped, and there was very little room for either passengers or luggage. The seats were basic and lacked support, making long drives uncomfortable. The suspension was rudimentary, leading to a bumpy ride on uneven roads. Inside, the materials were cheap, and the dashboard was simple to the point of being sparse. There was no luxury to be found here, just the bare essentials for driving. Heating was minimal, and there were no advanced features like air conditioning or even a radio in the base models. This was a car designed purely for getting from point A to point B with as little cost as possible. Despite these shortcomings, the Gago Mobile had a certain charm that endeared it to those who needed affordable transportation. In post-war Europe, many people couldn't afford full-sized cars, and the Gago Mobile filled a niche for cheap, accessible vehicles. Its small size made it easy to park and maneuver in crowded cities, and its low fuel consumption was a significant advantage during a time when economic recovery was still underway. The Gago Mobile may not have been fast, comfortable, or safe, but it was economical, and for many people, that was enough. The Gago Mobile's affordability made it a popular choice among budget-conscious drivers. It was an inexpensive alternative to larger cars, and its low operating costs appealed to those who needed basic transportation but didn't have the means to purchase anything more luxurious. The simplicity of the car also meant that it was relatively easy to maintain, with straightforward mechanics that didn't require specialized tools or parts. While its lack of power and comfort made it less than ideal for long journeys, the Gago Mobile was perfectly suited to short city trips and local errands, which is exactly what many of its buyers needed. By the time production ended in 1969, the Gago Mobile had already become somewhat of an automotive relic, with more modern, better-performing cars dominating the market.
The Fiat 600, produced from 1955 to 1969, was one of the quintessential post-war European cars, designed to offer mobility to the masses during a time of economic recovery and urban expansion. Although it earned a reputation as an affordable, practical vehicle, it was also plagued by several design flaws and limitations that held it back from being a truly refined automobile. Its small size, lack of power, and mechanical issues, particularly its tendency to overheat, made the Fiat 600 a mixed bag, widely used but far from a premium driving experience. One of the most notable aspects of the Fiat 600 was its size. At just over 3 meters in length, it was a compact car through and through, designed to fit into the tight streets of European cities. Its small dimensions made it easy to park and navigate through congested areas, which was an appealing factor for urban drivers. However, this small size came at the expense of interior comfort. The car could technically seat 4 people, but the cramped cabin left very little space for passengers to stretch out. Anyone sitting in the back had to squeeze in, especially if the driver or front passenger needed their seats pushed back. Luggage space was also minimal, relegated to a small trunk at the front and a tiny rear storage area. The Fiat 600 was powered by a rear-mounted, water-cooled inline-4 engine, which was innovative at the time, but also a source of many problems. The early models came with a 633 cubic centimeter engine that produced around 21.5 horsepower, enough to get the car moving, but not much more than that. With a top speed of around 60 miles per hour, 96 kilometers per hour, the Fiat 600 was not designed for speed, and it struggled on highways or open roads where higher speeds were necessary. Acceleration was slow, and the car took a significant amount of time to reach its modest top speed. While it was adequate for city driving, where low speeds were the norm, the Fiat 600's lack of power made it unsuitable for more demanding conditions. One of the Fiat 600's biggest flaws was its tendency to overheat, especially in the early models. The rear-mounted engine, while compact and space-saving, did not receive adequate airflow, leading to frequent overheating issues. The cooling system was simply not robust enough to handle the heat generated by the engine, especially during long drives or in hot weather. Owners often had to deal with the frustration of engine failures or overheating on the road, and these problems became a well-known Achilles heel of the car. Fiat made improvements over the years, but the overheating problem left a lasting mark on the car's reputation. Another issue with the Fiat 600 was its lack of refinement. The car was designed to be simple and affordable, which meant that many of the comforts and conveniences found in more expensive cars were left out. The interior was Spartan, with basic materials and minimal features. The dashboard was simple, with only the most essential gauges and controls. There was little in the way of soundproofing, which meant that the engine noise was always present in the cabin. The suspension was rudimentary, providing a rough ride over uneven roads, and the handling, while acceptable at low speeds, became less predictable at higher speeds due to the rear engine layout. Despite these shortcomings, the Fiat 600 was incredibly popular in Europe, particularly in Italy and Spain, where it was produced under license as the Seat 600. The car's low cost made it accessible to a wide range of consumers, and it became a symbol of economic prosperity in post-war Europe. For many families, the Fiat 600 was their first car, allowing them to travel further and more comfortably than they could on public transportation. Its small size and affordability made it a hit with urban drivers who needed a practical, no-frills vehicle for daily use. The Fiat 600 also had a significant cultural impact, particularly in Italy, where it became a symbol of the country's post-war industrial boom. The car was so popular that it became part of the fabric of everyday life, seen everywhere from city streets to rural roads. Its affordability allowed many Italians to become car owners for the first time, and the Fiat 600 became an icon of mobility and economic progress. It was often seen as a people's car, much like the Volkswagen Beetle in Germany or the Citroen 2CV in France. In terms of design, the Fiat 600 was somewhat unremarkable. Its rounded, boxy shape was functional, but lacked the flair that would become more common in later Fiat models like the 500. The rear engine layout, while practical in terms of space saving, gave the car an odd weight distribution that affected its handling. The car's small wheels and narrow stance made it look somewhat toy-like, and it didn't have the sleek modern lines of more stylish vehicles from the era. The Austin A35, produced between 1956 and 1968, was a small, budget-friendly car aimed primarily at working-class families and individuals who needed a reliable and affordable mode of transportation. While it was a step up from its predecessor, the Austin A30, the A35 wasn't known for its style or innovation. It was a car that placed practicality above all else, and its underwhelming design, weak engine, and basic features made it more of a utilitarian vehicle than a desirable one. In terms of design, the Austin A35 looked dated even when it was first introduced. Its bulbous, rounded body shape, small dimensions, and narrow wheels made it appear more like a pre-war design rather than a modern car for the late 1950s. The headlights were positioned high on the front of the car, giving it a bug-eyed appearance, while the grille and front fascia were simple and unadorned. Its small windows and cramped proportions gave the A35 a somewhat awkward and old-fashioned look, which failed to keep up with the more stylish cars that were emerging during this era. The interior of the Austin A35 was equally basic. There was very little room for passengers, especially in the back seat, where legroom was at a premium. The seats were thinly padded and lacked support, making long journeys uncomfortable. The dashboard was simple and functional, with only the most essential gauges and controls. There was no luxury to be found in the A35. It was built to be as affordable as possible, and that meant cutting back on any non-essential features. The lack of refinement in the materials used for the interior gave the car a Spartan, utilitarian feel that reinforced its reputation as a no-frills vehicle. Under the hood, the Austin A35 was powered by a small, 948 cubic centimeter inline-4 engine that produced just 34 horsepower. This weak engine made the car slow and underpowered, especially when compared to other cars on the market at the time. Acceleration was sluggish, and the A35 struggled to reach highway speeds with a top speed of only around 70 miles per hour. The car's handling was also poor, with its narrow tires and basic suspension system providing little in the way of road grip or comfort. It was adequate for city driving, but on open roads or in challenging conditions, the A35's limitations became readily apparent. One of the few positive aspects of the Austin A35 was its fuel efficiency. Thanks to its small engine and lightweight construction, the car was relatively economical to run, which made it an appealing option for cash-strapped families during the post-war period. Fuel consumption was low, and maintenance costs were generally manageable, which contributed to the A35's popularity among those who needed an affordable, reliable car for everyday use. However, this came at the expense of performance and comfort, which made the A35 less appealing to drivers who were looking for more than just a cheap way to get around. The Austin A35's practicality and affordability were perhaps its strongest selling points. For many families in the 1950s and 1960s, owning a car was still a luxury, and the A35 provided an entry point to car ownership for those who couldn't afford more expensive models. Its simple construction made it relatively easy to repair and maintain, and its small size made it well suited for the narrow streets of British towns and cities. It was a dependable workhorse that got the job done, even if it didn't do so with much flair or excitement. Despite its shortcomings, the Austin A35 did have a certain charm that endeared it to a segment of the population. Its small, cute appearance, combined with its simplicity, made it a car that people could form an emotional attachment to, especially those for whom it was their first car. It also became a common sight in motorsport, particularly in low-cost racing events where its lightweight design and nimble handling at low speeds made it a fun, if not particularly fast, competitor. In later years, the Austin A35 found a second life as a collectible car. While it was never considered a classic during its production run, its quirky design and association with an era of British motoring nostalgia have made it a favorite among classic car enthusiasts. Its role in the 1960s British life, where it was often the family car for working-class households, gives it a certain historical value that appeals to collectors today. Ultimately, the Austin A35 was a product of its time. A simple, inexpensive car built for a market that prioritized affordability and reliability over style and performance. It was never a standout in terms of design or engineering, but it served its purpose as an accessible car for the masses. For many people, the A35 represents a piece of motoring history, a reminder of a time when cars were built to be affordable first and foremost, even if that meant sacrificing comfort, power, and aesthetics. The Simca 1000, produced from 1961 to 1978, stands as a classic example of a budget car designed to meet the basic transportation needs of the masses. While it was affordable and functional, it was often criticized for its numerous shortcomings, which ultimately overshadowed its practicality. The exterior of the Simca 1000 was characterized by its boxy shape, which was common among compact cars of its era. The design lacked the sleek lines and curves that many consumers were beginning to appreciate in the 1960s. Its angular bodywork gave it a rather utilitarian appearance, making it seem more like a rolling appliance than an automobile. The front end featured simple, rectangular headlights and a plain grille that did little to enhance its visual appeal. Overall, the aesthetics of the Simca 1000 were bland and uninspired, making it one of the less memorable designs of the time. Under the hood, the Simca 1000 was powered by a modest 1.0-liter four-cylinder engine, which produced around 40 horsepower. While this was adequate for urban driving, it left much to be desired on the highway, where acceleration was sluggish and passing power was almost non-existent. The car's performance was further hampered by its poor handling characteristics. Drivers often reported a lack of stability, particularly at higher speeds or during cornering, which made the car feel unsafe and unresponsive. This lack of refinement in its driving dynamics led many to view the Simca 1000 as a vehicle best suited for short trips rather than long journeys. Inside, the Simca 1000 offered a basic and Spartan environment. The dashboard was functional but lacked any real style or modern conveniences. The materials used throughout the cabin were cheap and uninviting, contributing to an overall sense of austerity. While the seating was reasonably comfortable for short trips, long drives could become tiresome due to the lack of lumbar support and basic amenities. Space was adequate for a small family, but the overall design did little to make passengers feel comfortable or engaged during their journeys. One of the most significant criticisms of the Simca 1000 was its reputation for mechanical problems. Owners frequently reported issues ranging from electrical failures to transmission problems, which detracted from the car's reliability. These persistent issues led to a perception that the Simca 1000 was not a long-term investment, and many drivers found themselves in and out of the mechanic's shop more often than they would have liked. This lack of reliability ultimately hurt the car's reputation, despite its low purchase price. Despite its numerous shortcomings, the Simca 1000 gained popularity in various markets, particularly in Europe. Its affordability made it an attractive option for first-time car buyers and those on tight budgets. The car became a common sight on the roads, particularly in France, where it was embraced as an accessible vehicle for the masses. For many families, the Simca 1000 represented a stepping stone to car ownership, providing them with the freedom and convenience of having their own vehicle. Today, the Simca 1000 is often remembered with a sense of nostalgia, as it represents a specific era in automotive history. While it was not a particularly good car by most standards, its simplicity and affordability endeared it to many drivers at the time. Collectors appreciate the Simca 1000 for its historical significance and its role in making car ownership more accessible. However, it is important to recognize that the car's legacy is marred by its numerous flaws, which have led many enthusiasts to view it with a mix of affection and amusement. In conclusion, the Simca 1000 serves as a prime example of a budget vehicle that prioritized affordability over performance and aesthetics. While it was undoubtedly functional for many, its design and handling deficiencies, coupled with mechanical problems, left it as a car that few would hold in high regard. The Simca 1000 remains a symbol of its time, a vehicle that was more about getting from point A to point B than about providing an enjoyable driving experience. The Ford Anglia, produced from 1948 to 1967, is remembered as a staple of post-war British motoring. It was created with practicality and affordability at its core, intended to serve as an accessible car for families looking for basic transportation rather than style or performance. Its unpretentious design, functional engineering, and simplicity in both form and function earned it a wide customer base, especially among working-class families who wanted a car that could meet their everyday needs without breaking the bank. The earliest models of the Anglia, introduced shortly after World War II, reflected the austerity of the time. They were minimalistic in both looks and performance, built during a period when car manufacturers were recovering from wartime production constraints and focusing on utilitarian vehicles that would meet the basic needs of the population. The first Anglia models featured a 933 cubic centimeter, 4-cylinder side valve engine, which was hardly powerful, offering only 24 horsepower. This made acceleration slow and limited the car's overall top speed to around 60 miles per hour, barely enough to keep up with traffic on highways. However, in post-war Britain, where petrol was still being rationed and roads weren't built for speed, this kind of performance was acceptable to many drivers. The Anglia's design was simple and boxy, with straight lines and a no-frills aesthetic that prioritized function over form. The headlights were set far apart, giving the car a slightly wide-eyed look, while the grille and bumper followed basic design conventions. The car's overall size was small and compact, ideal for navigating Britain's narrow streets and tight parking spaces. It was built for urban life, not for long-distance driving or high-speed performance, which suited many people at the time. However, the most iconic and controversial iteration of the Anglia came with the launch of the 105e model in 1959. This version, which introduced a complete redesign, brought the Anglia a touch of stylistic flair that previous models had lacked. The 105e featured a reverse rake rear window, a design feature that was quite radical for the time. The backward slanted rear window, meant to reduce sun glare for passengers, gave the car an odd futuristic look. While this design choice did succeed in differentiating the Anglia from its competitors, it also contributed to its goofy, almost cartoonish appearance. The reverse-sloped window was complemented by the car's small angular body, creating a look that some drivers found quirky and charming, while others deemed it awkward and impractical. The Anglia's interior reflected the same commitment to minimalism. It had a simple dashboard layout with basic gauges and knobs that provided only the essential information. The seats were functional, but far from luxurious, with basic upholstery and minimal padding. Space inside the Anglia was tight, especially for families, and the trunk wasn't particularly large either. Comfort took a backseat to practicality, as the car's designers were clearly focused on keeping costs down to appeal to budget-conscious consumers. Driving the Anglia was also a straightforward affair. The 105e model was powered by a 997 cubic centimeter, 4-cylinder engine that produced around 39 horsepower, a small improvement over earlier versions, but still far from impressive. This engine was mated to a 4-speed manual gearbox, and while the car could reach the speeds of up to 70 miles per hour, it wasn't built for performance. The Anglia's handling was competent for urban driving, with light steering that made it easy to maneuver through narrow streets and tight spaces. However, it struggled on highways or hilly terrain, where the limited power and lightweight design became more apparent. The suspension was basic, providing a somewhat bouncy ride, especially on uneven roads, while the drum brakes, though adequate, required careful handling when stopping from higher speeds. Despite these limitations, the Anglia became a familiar sight on British roads throughout the 1950s and 1960s. Its affordability was a major selling point, allowing thousands of families to purchase their first car. The Anglia offered just enough space for a small family, and while it lacked power, speed, or modern conveniences, it was dependable and relatively inexpensive to maintain. Many Anglia owners appreciated its simplicity, viewing it as a reliable workhorse that got them from point A to point B without fuss or complications. The Anglia also gained some notoriety outside the automotive world, most famously with its appearance in the Harry Potter series. In the films, a 1960s Ford Anglia is enchanted to fly, carrying Harry and Ron to Hogwarts in a memorable scene. This portrayal gave the Anglia a quirky, almost magical reputation, amplifying its status as an oddball icon in the automotive world. The Skoda 1000 MB, produced between 1964 and 1969, was intended to be a revolutionary vehicle for the Czechoslovak automaker. It was a significant departure from Skoda's earlier models, as it embraced a rear-engine, rear-wheel drive layout, which was a popular configuration in Europe at the time. The MB in its name stood for Mlada Boleslav, the town where Skoda's headquarters and manufacturing plant were located. It was also meant to symbolize the move towards mass production techniques, making the 1000 megabyte a defining model for Skoda. However, despite its ambitions, the 1000 megabyte was far from flawless, and it quickly earned a reputation as a problematic car. The major appeal of the 1000 megabytes was its affordability. It was marketed as a car for the masses, aimed at providing cheap and accessible transportation to the working class in Czechoslovakia and other parts of Eastern Europe. During this period, there were few alternatives for Eastern Bloc consumers, making the 1000 megabytes a popular choice by necessity rather than desire. The most glaring issue with the Skoda 1000 MB was its rear-engine layout, which was prone to causing a host of mechanical problems. The placement of the engine in the rear, while improving interior space, led to poor weight distribution. This created a noticeable imbalance in the car's handling, especially on winding roads or during wet or icy conditions. Oversteer was a common problem, making the car tricky to control for less experienced drivers. Additionally, because the engine was air-cooled and crammed into the back of the car, overheating became a frequent issue. Many owners found themselves stuck on the side of the road due to engine failures, particularly during the hot summer months. Powering the Skoda 1000 MB was a 1.0-liter inline-4 engine, which produced a modest 42 horsepower. This was a small amount of power, even by 1960s standards, and made the car feel sluggish and underpowered. Acceleration was slow and the car struggled to reach highway speeds, particularly when loaded with passengers or luggage. This lack of power, combined with the weight imbalance from the rear engine layout, contributed to an overall poor driving experience. The 1000 megabytes was noisy, rattling at higher speeds, and the engine drone was ever present in the cabin, making long journeys uncomfortable and tiring. The interior of the Skoda 1000 MB was as basic as its performance. While it did offer seating for 4 adults, comfort was not a priority. The seats were thinly padded and offered little support, and the interior materials were of low quality. In typical Eastern Bloc fashion, the car lacked many features that were becoming common in Western vehicles during the 1960s, such as effective heating systems, air conditioning, or even basic sound insulation. This Spartan approach to interior design made the 1000 megabyte a utilitarian vehicle, meant for short trips rather than comfortable long-distance travel. One of the car's few redeeming qualities was its relatively spacious trunk, located at the front of the vehicle, thanks to the rear-engine design. This provided some practicality as it offered more cargo space than many other compact cars of the era, However, this alone wasn't enough to make up for the vehicle's overall deficiencies. Despite these numerous drawbacks, the Skoda 1000 MB was one of the few options available in Eastern Europe during its production run. For many consumers in Czechoslovakia and other parts of the Soviet bloc, the car represented an attainable dream of personal mobility. It may have been slow, unreliable, and uncomfortable, but it was one of the few affordable cars available. Its low price made it a lifeline for families who needed basic transportation, even if they had to endure frequent breakdowns and less than ideal driving conditions. The Skoda 1000 MB's problems were so notorious that they became part of the car's lasting legacy. While it did help Skoda transition into more modern production methods, it also cemented the brand's reputation for producing cars that, while affordable, were mechanically unsound. For decades, Skoda struggled to shake off the negative associations created by the 1000 MB. And it wasn't until much later, under Volkswagen's ownership, that Skoda would reinvent itself as a reliable and desirable brand. In retrospect, the Skoda 1000 MB serves as a reminder of the limitations of socialist economies, where the availability of goods like automobiles was limited, and consumers had little choice but to accept what was offered. Despite its failings, the 1000 megabyte was a symbol of progress for many Eastern Europeans, however flawed that progress may have been. It was a car that allowed ordinary families to own a vehicle, something that had been a luxury in previous generations, even if it came with the cost of endless mechanical headaches. The Wartburg 311, produced between 1956 and 1965 in East Germany, was a car that embodied the limitations of the automotive industry behind the Iron Curtain. Manufactured by the Eisenach-based Wartburg company, which had roots dating back to the early 20th century, the 311 was intended to be a more stylish and modern offering compared to its predecessors. However, despite its attempts to look modern, the car suffered from significant drawbacks that undermined its appeal. At first glance, the Wartburg 311 appeared more sophisticated than many other Eastern Bloc cars of the time. Its design, with rounded curves, a sloping roofline, and a sleek body, seemed to aim for a more elegant, Western-inspired look. The front grille was reminiscent of some of the contemporary American or Western European models, giving the 311 a slightly upscale appearance. However, beneath this exterior, the car's fundamental flaws were impossible to ignore. One of the most persistent complaints about the Wartburg 311 was its two-stroke engine. Two-stroke engines were common in Eastern Europe at the time because they were simpler and cheaper to produce, but they were also noisier, less fuel-efficient, and more polluting than four-stroke engines. The Wartburg 311's two-stroke engine produced an unpleasant loud whine that was unmistakable. It came with a 900cc engine that delivered around 37 horsepower, not much even by the standards of the 1950s. This lack of power made the car slow and underwhelming to drive, especially when loaded with passengers or goods. In addition to its sluggish performance, the Wartburg 311 was notorious for its poor build quality. Eastern Bloc cars were generally known for being built with limited resources and outdated technology, and the Wartburg 311 was no exception. The materials used in its construction were often subpar, resulting in frequent mechanical problems and early signs of wear and tear. The car was prone to rust and breakdowns were common, particularly in its drivetrain and electrical systems. Maintaining a Wartburg 311 could be a frustrating experience, as replacement parts were difficult to come by, and the car's design made even basic repairs a challenge for many owners. Handling was another weak point for the Wartburg 311. The combination of its two-stroke engine, front-wheel drive layout, and rudimentary suspension system made for a rough and noisy ride. The car struggled to maintain stability at higher speeds and performed poorly on uneven or rough roads, which were common in East Germany at the time. The Wartburg 311's lack of refinement in both its handling and engine performance meant that it was far from an enjoyable driving experience, especially on long trips. The car's interior reflected the same budget-oriented philosophy as its exterior. It was basic, offering little in the way of comfort or features. The seats were thinly padded, and space was limited, especially for taller passengers. While it could seat 5 people, the ride was often cramped and uncomfortable. There were few amenities beyond the essentials, which was typical for cars produced in the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War. In terms of convenience and driving pleasure, the Wartburg 311 lagged far behind its Western counterparts. Despite all of these issues, the Wartburg 311 still managed to sell in decent numbers within East Germany and other Eastern Bloc countries. The car's relatively low price and the lack of available alternatives made it one of the few options for people who wanted private transportation in East Germany. For many, owning a Wartburg 311 represented freedom and mobility, even if that freedom came with constant mechanical headaches and a noisy, uncomfortable ride. The car was also exported to several Western countries, including the United Kingdom and Sweden, where it was marketed as an affordable alternative to more expensive Western vehicles. However, the Wartburg 311's flaws quickly became apparent to Western buyers, and it never gained a strong foothold outside of the Eastern Bloc. The Wartburg 311's legacy is one of frustration and compromise. Like many cars from the Eastern Bloc, it was a product of its environment, built with limited resources, outdated technology, and a focus on affordability rather than quality. It reflected the economic realities of East Germany at the time, where cars were seen as functional tools rather than symbols of status or luxury. While it may have had an attractive exterior for its time, these cars represent the lower end of the automotive spectrum from the 1950s and 1960s. For many people, they were the only option, but their poor performance, reliability issues, and basic features meant they were far from desirable. Despite this, they remain an important part of automotive history, showing what budget-conscious consumers were forced to drive during that era.